They say the most dangerous truths are not the ones hidden in the shadows, but the ones displayed in plain sight, wrapped in respectability, and worshipped by the blind. Mexico City, winter of 1892. The richest quarter of the capital slept behind wrought iron gates and polished marble walls, a place where no one imagined evil could breathe. But on certain nights, when the wind moved just right down Tuba Street, a sound would crawl into the ears of those awake enough, or cursed enough, to hear it. It wasn't the roar of revolution, not the clash of drunks in the alley, or the distant gunshot that most residents had grown used to. It was the sound of children screaming. Not wild, panicked cries. No, this was something worse. These screams were measured, punctuated, carved out like a ritual, the kind of agony you can only hear when someone has time to design it. The neighbors never spoke of it openly. That's how respectable districts survive. They learn to keep their own secrets. The mansion at number 23 belonged to Senora Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano, widow, devout Catholic, patroness of the poor. Her black widow's gowns were as much a uniform as armor, her donations to the church the envy of other ladies. She embodied moral authority. And yet, behind her pink limestone facade, she was building something else, something the city's newspapers would never print, because it forced a question that terrified the elite. How much cruelty can hide behind a perfect reputation? I'm not here to tell you a simple crime story. I'm here to show you how systems, the social hierarchies, the church, the blind worship of wealth, not only allowed Mexico's first female serial killer to operate, but helped her. You're about to see how power protects itself and how it feeds on those who cannot defend themselves. Once you hear this, you will never again look at a respected figure without wondering what festers behind the mask. I am not giving you entertainment, I am giving you a weapon, and weapons once taken can never be returned. This is not the history you were meant to read in a school book. This is the history that was buried because it reveals the truth about control. The most dangerous predator is the one the system needs to keep alive, and Guadalupe was exactly that predator. Step through the doors of number 23 Tuba Street and you'd feel it instantly, not in your eyes, but in your skin. The air inside was too still, the kind of stillness that makes you think of churches after dark, or crypts. The marble floor was polished to a mirror's sheen, the furniture carved in heavy European styles, every inch a declaration of wealth and order. But order is a mask, and in this house it was the only thing keeping chaos from spilling out. Guadalupe understood that better than anyone. She knew appearances were currency, and she spent hers lavishly. She had built her life on two pillars, status and secrecy. The first bought her the protection of Mexico City's elite. The second allowed her to indulge an appetite she could never admit in daylight. She wasn't an impulsive killer. No, that would have made her sloppy. She was a student of cruelty. Every action calculated, every punishment measured. She didn't just inflict pain, she studied it, the way a scientist studies chemical reactions. Her mansion was a factory for two things. Upstairs, the performance, guests, priests, businessmen's wives sipping chocolate in the salon, the rituals of high society played out under the watchful eyes of saints painted in gold leaf. Downstairs, the truth. The servant quarters and the cellar were not parts of the home, they were her laboratory. This was where the rural girls arrived. Desperate, dirt-poor, eyes wide with gratitude, girls whose families could not read, whose names the city would never remember. To Guadalupe, they weren't people, they were raw material. Her method was simple, elegant and lethal. First, trust, shelter, meals, work, the illusion of safety. Second, fault. Finding imperfections invisible to anyone else, planting the seed that the girl was failing. Third, isolation, cutting her off from any possible escape, physically and psychologically. Only then would the real training begin. The first time you hear of Guadalupe, you might think she was a singular monster. That's the lie polite society tells itself, but you will see. Predators like her thrive because everything around them is built to let them. The church blessed her, the law ignored her, the neighbors pretended not to hear. She was not just a murderer in black lace, she was a mirror, reflecting the truth about a society that would rather protect its image than its children. And in January of 1887, the perfect victim walked right into her arms. January 18th, 1887. A cold, grey morning where the mist from the ancient lakebed still clung to the streets of Mexico City like the breath of the dead. That's when Casimira Juarez appeared at the carved wooden door of number 23 Tuba Street. 16 years old, alone, carrying everything she owned in a bundle no bigger than a pillow. Her parents, taken by cholera. Her village, emptied by hunger. The parish priest had given her a letter of recommendation and a promise. Senora Bejarano will give you honest work, child. She helps girls like you. When Guadalupe opened the door, she didn't just see a girl, she saw a profile, vulnerable, grateful, alone, the exact psychological material she needed for her work. Casimira's dark hair was neatly braided, her patched dress clean, her eyes wide with that mixture of fear and hope that told Guadalupe everything. "I can see you've been raised properly," Guadalupe said, her voice the perfect mix of warmth and command. She scanned the priest's letter, nodded. "Good references are essential here. I maintain high standards." She led the girl inside through the marble hall, past heavy crucifixes and oil paintings of saints. To Casimira, it must have felt like walking into safety. To Guadalupe, it was sealing a door that would never open again. The room she gave Casimira was small, but spotless. Narrow bed, wash basin, a crucifix on the wall. "You'll find I treat my servants fairly," Guadalupe said. "But I expect absolute obedience and discretion. The families I serve demand nothing less." The first 2 weeks were almost pleasant. A strict schedule, yes, rising before dawn, cleaning, mending, assisting in the kitchen, but no outright cruelty. Casimira believed she had been given a blessing. That belief was her leash. And all the while Guadalupe was watching. Every reaction, every flinch, how Casimira handled criticism, how Leo's, long before her hands trembled from fatigue, how her face changed when she was denied food. This wasn't supervision. It was data collection. Because Guadalupe's cruelty wasn't random, it was a process. She didn't just want obedience, she wanted to break a human being and watch it happen. What Casimira didn't know was that her life had already been reduced to an experiment, and experiments, in this house, never ended well for the subject. It began the way all true destruction begins, subtly. No whips, no chains. Just words. At first, Guadalupe's corrections seemed harmless enough. A bit of dust left in the corner, a wrinkle in a bedsheet, soup that was a degree too cold. Small faults, barely worth mentioning, but mentioned every single day. "You're not as well trained as your priest claimed," she would say, her voice silk over steel. "Perhaps you need a more intensive education." Casimira would bow her head, apologize, and work harder. And that was the trap. The harder she tried, the more faults Guadalupe found. This was the first cut, the cutting away of confidence. Without confidence, a person starts looking to their tormentor for guidance. Phase 2 was fatigue, standing in the kitchen for hours without moving, cleaning the same floor 3 times, scrubbing on her knees until her palms split, then being scolded for bleeding on the stone. No raised voice, no obvious violence, just relentless demands designed to grind the will into dust. Aurelio, the pale ghost of a son who haunted the upper floors, saw the signs. He had grown up inside this pattern. He recognized the sharpening glitter in his mother's eyes, the signal that she was shifting from discipline to something far darker. But Aurelio had learned long ago that speaking up only made him another target. Then came the first deprivation. One evening, after accusing Casimira of carelessness, Guadalupe simply withheld dinner. The next day, lunch as well. Hunger gnawed, and hunger changes people. It makes them obedient. It makes them small. When Guadalupe finally gave her a crust of bread and a sip of broth, Casimira thanked her. That's when the door really closed. Gratitude for cruelty. That's the moment a person becomes a subject, not a servant. This is how predators like Guadalupe operate in the open, not with obvious brutality that would risk exposure, but with invisible chains. Chains made of self-doubt, exhaustion, hunger, and the constant fear of failing an authority figure. Understand this. The tools of control in this mansion are the same ones used in boardrooms, in interrogation rooms, in political campaigns. The techniques don't change. Only the scale does. By the end of the third week, Casimira's spirit was bending, and Guadalupe was just getting started. By February, the corrections were no longer corrections. They had become lessons, and lessons, in Guadalupe's mind, required pain. It began with the coal cellar. A single flicker of imagined defiance, a glance she decided was disrespect, and Casimira was sent into the pitch-dark cold for an entire night. No blanket, no light, just the damp chill and the knowledge that upstairs warmth and food existed, but not for her. From that night forward, Casimira's world was split in two. The upstairs, with its religious paintings, velvet curtains and polite conversation, the world of performance. And the downstairs, the place she was being remade, the world of truth. Guadalupe called it her training room, a stone-floored cellar, walls bare except for hooks and chains bolted into the mortar. The air down there had a smell, iron, damp, and something sharper, something that came from skin. Casimira's punishments now involved precision. Guadalupe didn't beat wildly. She was methodical, an iron rod held near the skin until the heat became unbearable, then the briefest touch, enough to blister but not kill. Hours forced to kneel on coarse salt, standing naked in the cold until her teeth rattled, then ordered to recite prayers without a stutter, under threat of starting over. But the genius and the horror was in the intervals. Between the cruelty, Guadalupe would become kind. She'd offer a shawl, tend to wounds with salve, feed her a warm meal. She'd speak softly, even praise her. And then, once Casimira's hope flickered back to life, she'd crush it again. This wasn't just torture, this was conditioning, the same psychological mechanism used in cults, in secret prisons, in covert experiments, the endless cycle of reward and punishment, until the subject stops trying to escape and starts trying to please. Upstairs, Aurelio tried to pretend the muffled cries from tea. Cellar were his imagination. He wrote in his journal instead. February the 15th. The screaming is worse. She says it's for the girl's moral improvement. I think she enjoys it. You need to understand. The worst kind of cruelty isn't fueled by rage. Rage burns out. What makes someone truly dangerous is when they enjoy it enough to plan it. And Guadalupe's planning was far from over. The breaking point didn't look like a scream. It looked like silence. By the first week of March, Casimira no longer begged, no longer argued, no longer even reacted. When Guadalupe ordered her to hold her hands over a candle flame, she simply obeyed, staring at the blistering skin as if it belonged to someone else. That's how you know a person's mind is fracturing, when they stop fighting to protect themselves. Guadalupe had been waiting for this moment. Breaking someone wasn't the end game. Rebuilding them in her own design, that was the prize. She began what she called advanced obedience. Casimira was made to stand in front of a mirror for hours, reciting the phrases Guadalupe dictated. I am nothing without her. I deserve only what she gives. My body belongs to the house. Sometimes Guadalupe made her repeat a sentence until her voice cracked, then made her start again. It wasn't about belief. Not yet. It was about rewiring the mind through repetition and exhaustion until belief became irrelevant. But then came the final trial. On March the 9th, Guadalupe invited a wealthy client to the mansion, a banker's widow with a taste for whispered scandals. The two women drank chocolate in the upstairs salon while Casimira stood silently by, serving them. Halfway through the visit, Guadalupe noticed that the silver tray had a faint fingerprint. She smiled at her guest and said, "Would you care to see how I handle imperfection?" She led them both down to the cellar. The guest laughed nervously at first, thinking it was some sort of strange parlor entertainment, but when Guadalupe took out the iron rod and placed it in the brazier, the laughter stopped. Casimira didn't scream when the burn came. That silence, that compliance, was the performance Guadalupe wanted to show off, proof of her mastery. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. She wanted the ultimate display, obedience unto death. 3 nights later, Casimira collapsed while cleaning. Her breathing was shallow, her skin fever-hot. Weeks of malnutrition, infection from untreated wounds, and relentless strain had done their work. Guadalupe didn't call a doctor. She sat beside the bed, stroking Casimira's hair as the girl slipped away, whispering, "Good. Rest now. You were mine until the end." The death was ruled natural causes, and for Guadalupe, it was a success, her first subject to break entirely before life itself gave out. The morning after Casimira's death, the mansion was unnervingly quiet. Aurelio, pale and sleepless, lingered outside the bedroom door while his mother moved inside with the slow precision of someone handling valuables. She didn't weep. She didn't pray. She simply prepared the body, washed it, dressed it in a plain cotton gown, combed the hair until it gleamed. The girl's blistered hands were folded neatly over her stomach. When the priest arrived, Guadalupe spoke in a voice lacquered with grief. She was fragile from the start. The winter was too much for her. I did everything I could. The priest, who owed her 2 favors and a debt of silence, nodded solemnly. He signed the death certificate with a flourish. Fever and weakness. In the official record, Casimira's suffering vanished. But Guadalupe wasn't done. Within hours, she transformed tragedy into currency. She invited 3 influential women, wives of merchants, a magistrate's sister, and the widow from the banker's estate, to the salon for an intimate service. They came expecting tears. What they found was Guadalupe speaking softly about the dangers of undisciplined girls sent out from rural parishes. She could not be saved, she told them, because she had not been shaped properly in her youth. Imagine if we had the right place to train them before they were sent into service. It wasn't a eulogy, it was a proposal. By the end of the evening, all 3 women had pledged to support her idea, financially, discreetly. The banker's widow even suggested a location, an unused wing of her cousin's estate, far from the city's watchful eyes. Guadalupe's next project was taking shape. A private institution, hidden under the guise of charity, where girls could be prepared for service in wealthy homes. Aurelio watched it all in silence. He knew what preparation meant. He had seen it, heard it, led it. But he also knew something else. His mother's power came not just from cruelty, but from protection. These women didn't fear her methods. They feared losing the control she offered them. Casimira's death wasn't a crime in their eyes. It was proof of concept. The training house opened quietly in late spring. No fanfare, no public announcement, only a few carefully worded invitations sent through private messengers to the wealthiest families in the region. The offer was simple. For a modest donation, your troublesome daughter, niece, or ward could be corrected and molded into a model of obedience before entering society or service. The first 3 arrivals came on the same day. 2 were merchants' daughters, soft-handed, well-fed, with eyes that darted nervously as they stepped inside. The third was different. Thin, bruised, and sullen, she had been pulled from a rural orphanage after disciplinary issues. Her name was Clara. From the moment they entered, Guadalupe divided them. She separated the weak from the defiant, the compliant from the resistant. She understood that to break a spirit, you must first understand its shape. The training house itself was a masterpiece of duality. By day, the girls saw sunlight in the main hall, heard gentle music, and ate meals served on porcelain plates. Visitors, always wealthy women, could walk through and see young ladies engaged in sewing, reading scripture, or practicing the piano. By night, the real work began. The basement had been fitted with cells. The walls were thick enough to muffle cries, but thin enough for neighboring cells to catch the echoes, a constant reminder of what awaited them if they failed. Guadalupe's methods evolved here. She introduced pair punishments. 2 girls punished together so one would blame the other, dissolving any solidarity. She used sleep control, allowing no more than 4 hours of rest, keeping the mind fogged and pliable. And she began experimenting with shame drills, forcing girls to confess sins they hadn't committed, just to see how quickly false guilt could be planted. Clara resisted the longest. She refused to cry, refused to say the obedience phrases, refused to take her place at the sewing table. But resistance had a cost. The more she defied, the more the others were punished alongside her. Soon, they hated her for it, just as Guadalupe intended. Aurelio visited once that month, standing at the edge of the hall while the girls sat in silence, eyes down. He wrote later in his journal, "They are not children anymore. They are statues shaped by her hands." Clara's defiance was not loud, it was infectious. She didn't scream, didn't throw fits. She simply refused to be remade. She looked the other girls in the eye when they were told to stare at the floor. She hummed under her breath when silence was demanded. She even smiled. Not the hollow, fearful kind Guadalupe cultivated, but the real, small smile of someone who still owned herself. That smile was dangerous. Guadalupe understood that open rebellion could be crushed, but quiet resilience could spread like rot through her perfect order. By the 3rd month, she noticed the other girls hesitating before obeying. Some took longer to answer commands. One even dared to help Clara clean her assigned cell, risking punishment. So Guadalupe set her sights on dismantling Clara publicly. The opportunity came during the obedience demonstration, a monthly ritual in which the wealthiest patrons were invited to witness the progress of their investments. Girls would display skills, perfect posture, flawless curtsies, and the recital of obedience phrases. When Clara's turn came, she stood at the center of the room, pale in her plain dress, eyes fixed on the floor. Guadalupe, smiling for the guests, instructed her to recite the phrases. Clara said nothing. A tense pause. The patrons shifted uncomfortably. Guadalupe repeated the command. Clara slowly looked up, not at Guadalupe, but at the women seated in their velvet chairs, and said, "Do you know what she does at night?" The room froze. For a second, no one moved, no one breathed. Then Guadalupe's hand shot out, striking Clara across the face. The guests gasped, but none intervened. The blow wasn't the punishment. It was the signal. 2 attendants dragged Clara from the hall and down into the basement. That night, every girl was kept awake, forced to listen as Clara's punishment echoed through the stone walls. Guadalupe made sure they heard each cry, each gasp, each choking breath. It was a lesson. Defiance doesn't just cost you, it costs everyone. By morning, Clara was gone. Guadalupe told the others she had been transferred to a stricter institution. No one believed it, but no one dared to speak. What Guadalupe didn't know was that Clara had left something behind. A small, folded scrap of paper hidden in the seam of her mattress. The note lay hidden for almost 3 years. The mattress it was sewn into was passed from one girl to another as new arrivals replaced the ones who graduated or disappeared. None of them thought to search it. Most were too afraid to even move anything in their rooms without permission. But in the spring of 1871, a new girl named Isela was assigned to the cell. Isela was not like the others. She was quiet, observant, and methodical, the kind of girl who could unpick a seam without leaving a trace. She found the note her second night. It was barely legible, the pencil lines faint from age and damp, but the words were clear enough. They will break you, but only if you let them touch your mind. Your body is theirs. Keep your thoughts yours. Clara. Isela didn't know who Clara was, but the message was an ember in a place built for cold. She kept it hidden, pulling it out in the darkest hours when punishments echoed through the walls. She memorized the words until she could whisper them silently in her head without even moving her lips. Over time, she began passing them along, not the physical note, but the idea. A glance during drills, A murmur while scrubbing floors, a single phrase slipped between lines of prayer. Your body is theirs. Keep your thoughts yours. It was dangerous. The girls weren't stupid. They knew if the attendants heard even a hint of such talk, the price would be unbearable. But something shifted. They obeyed outwardly, but inside the grip loosened. Guadalupe noticed the difference without understanding the cause. The punishment still worked. The tears came, the confessions flowed, but the girls' eyes were changing. They no longer looked beaten, only masked. It was subtle, but for a woman like Guadalupe, any loss of control was an insult. One evening during inspection, Guadalupe saw Isela's faint smirk. It was only for a second, but it was enough. She ordered Isela to remain behind after the others were dismissed. In the dim candlelight, Guadalupe leaned in and whispered, "Whatever you think you're hiding, I will dig it out of you." Isela didn't flinch. She only said, "You couldn't dig it out of Clara either." The name was a spark, and Guadalupe realized with a sudden chill that her ghost was still walking these halls. Clara's name was not spoken in the training house. Guadalupe had erased her from the records, burned her clothing, and instructed every attendant never to mention her again. In her mind, Clara had been a corruption, a small infection she had cut out before it spread. But now, 3 years later, the infection had returned. That night, Guadalupe went to her office and unlocked the iron drawer where she kept the disciplinary ledgers. Each girl had a file, name, age, family, behavioral notes, and final disposition. She found the gap where Clara's folder should have been, a clean space between two files. No record remained, yet the name lived on in the whispers of girls who were too young to have ever met her. That meant only one thing: Clara had become a myth. Myths were dangerous because they didn't need proof. They needed only belief. Guadalupe began her hunt. She summoned girls one by one, asking if they'd ever heard the name. Most shook their heads and trembled. Some cried, insisting they didn't know. A few, too frightened to lie, admitted they had heard it in a dream or once from the lips of another. The answers only deepened the problem. If Clara's memory was spreading without direct contact, it meant something else was carrying her. An idea, a phrase, perhaps even a written word. So Guadalupe began a purge. She ordered every mattress stripped, every seam cut open, every crack in the stone scraped clean. She burned all the bedding, destroyed personal items, and forbade the girls from speaking to each other except during assigned drills. Still, the change in their eyes persisted. Aurelio visited that month and found his sister pacing the main hall like a caged animal. She spoke to him in low, clipped tones. "She's still here, Aurelio. That girl. She's here in their minds. I can see her." Aurelio, pragmatic and cold, replied, "Then you must kill her again." The suggestion was simple, but killing a ghost is not the same as killing a body. Clara's rebellion had left no corpse to bury. It had seeded itself in thought, and thought spreads in ways chains cannot bind. Guadalupe, however, refused to accept the idea of something she could not control. She would find the source, even if it meant breaking every girl in the house. The search began with the beds. Guadalupe stood in the center of the dormitory as attendants tore apart the mattresses, scattering hay and shredded fabric across the floor. The air filled with dust and the sharp tang of mildew. Girls sat against the walls, knees drawn to their chests, forced to watch the dismantling of the only places they had to sleep. Every seam was split, every corner checked, and then, at the bottom of the third pile, one of the attendants froze. She held up a scrap of cloth, folded into a tiny square, stiff with age. Guadalupe snatched it before anyone could see. It was not paper. It was a strip of linen, torn from what looked like an old shift, the kind girls wore during punishment sessions. On it, faint but still visible, someone had written in charcoal, "If they take your body, bury your mind where they cannot dig." It wasn't Clara's original note. The handwriting was different. Someone had copied it. Guadalupe's stomach tightened. This meant Clara's defiance had survived not by accident, but by deliberate replication. Girls had been passing it down, each creating a new version when the old one was at risk of discovery. Guadalupe crushed the fabric in her hand, but she didn't burn it yet. She needed to know who had made this one. That night, she ordered a midnight assembly. The girls were dragged from their beds and lined up barefoot in the cold corridor. Guadalupe walked slowly before them, holding the cloth like evidence in a trial. "Who wrote this?" she asked, voice low and even. Silence. The girls stared straight ahead. She tried again, louder. "Which of you carries the rot of Clara in your head?" No answer. Guadalupe's smile was thin and humorless. "Very well. Then I will take each of you one by one until someone speaks." The attendants moved forward, seizing the first girl in line, but before she could be dragged away, Isela stepped forward. Her voice was steady. "I wrote it." Gasps rippled down the corridor. Guadalupe studied her face. There was no fear, only a strange, almost serene defiance. "You've been spreading her words," Guadalupe said. "No," Isela corrected softly. "I've been keeping her alive." Isela was taken to the same basement room where Clara had last been seen alive. The floor was still stained in places from old punishments, the smell of iron and mildew hanging heavy in the air. A single candle burned on the table, its weak light barely pushing back the shadows. Guadalupe sat across from her, elbows resting on the wood, fingers steepled. "You know," she began, "Clara thought she was clever too. She believed words could shield her, but words are nothing when the body breaks." Isela's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe, but your problem is, hers didn't." Guadalupe leaned forward, her voice dropping into a hiss. "You think she won? She was erased. I saw to it myself." Isela shook her head slowly, almost pityingly. "You erased her from paper, not from people. She walked out of here in more than one of us." That statement caught Guadalupe off guard. It was too specific, too certain. "What do you mean?" Isela's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Clara didn't die here. You didn't even keep her. You lost her before you realized she was gone." For a moment, Guadalupe thought it was a bluff, but then a memory flickered. The night Clara vanished. She'd assumed the girl had collapsed in the corner after the final session. But when she'd gone to retrieve her, she'd been gone. No open door, no sign of struggle, just gone. Guadalupe's voice hardened. "If you know where she is, you'll tell me." Isela only replied, "You've already met her since then. You just didn't recognize her." A pulse of unease rippled through Guadalupe's chest. She thought of the visiting servants, the supply deliveries, the occasional tradespeople allowed inside. Could Clara have been among them? No, impossible. Yet the certainty in Isela's voice gnawed at her. "You are going to tell me," Guadalupe said, standing. Isela's tone was quiet, but her words were sharp. "I don't need to. She's coming back here on her own." The candle between them flickered, and for the first time in years, Guadalupe felt something she could not control. The slow, tightening coil of dread. The idea haunted Guadalupe all night. She paced her office until dawn, hearing Isela's words over and over. "She's coming back." Return was not a concept in Guadalupe's world. Girls left in one of two ways, buried or sold to men who never brought them back. No one returned without permission, and yet, Clara had always been different. Her mind had been sharper than the others, her silence more dangerous than open rebellion. By mid-morning, Guadalupe summoned Aurelio. He arrived looking half bored, half irritated, but when she repeated Isela's claim, his face tightened. "That's not a threat," he said. "That's a plan." Guadalupe frowned. "You think she's actually coming?" "I think," Aurelio replied, "that if she is, she won't be alone." They both knew the risk. A single escaped girl could spread stories that would undo years of careful control, but if she returned with proof, or worse, with allies, it could mean the end of the training house. Guadalupe ordered immediate changes. The front gates were to remain barred at all hours. Supply deliveries would now be inspected twice, and any unfamiliar servant would be detained for questioning. The girls were kept indoors, forbidden from even approaching the windows, and yet the sense of intrusion grew. That evening, during roll call, one of the attendants froze mid-sentence. She was staring at the back row, at a girl with her head bowed, face hidden by loose hair. "Who is that?" the attendant asked. Guadalupe's eyes snapped toward the figure. "Raise your head." The girl obeyed. The room went silent. She was not Clara, at least not exactly. Her hair was darker, her face thinner, but her eyes were the same pale, unyielding grey that had haunted Guadalupe for 3 years. The girl didn't speak. She didn't have to. A faint smile curved her lips, the same smile Clara had given on the night she vanished. "D." Guadalupe's voice came out lower than she intended. "Name." The girl answered without hesitation. "Marielle." Guadalupe dismissed the assembly early, but her hands shook as she poured herself a drink in her office. She knew, with a certainty that made her stomach turn, that Marielle was not a stranger. Marielle was brought to Guadalupe's office under the pretense of a private orientation. 2 attendants stood by the door as Guadalupe motioned for the girl to sit. Up close, the similarities were even more unnerving. The way she folded her hands, the subtle tilt of her head when she listened, these were Clara's mannerisms, as precise as if they'd been rehearsed. Guadalupe began casually. "You're new?" "Yes," Marielle replied, her voice soft, almost delicate. "Where did you come from?" Marielle's eyes flickered upward, meeting hers without hesitation. "A place you can't reach." The attendants shifted uncomfortably. Guadalupe forced a thin smile. "Everyone can be reached." "That's what you think," Marielle said, and there was something in her tone, not defiance exactly, but certainty. "You believe walls keep things in, but they also keep things out, and not everything outside wants to stay there." The words were wrong for a girl her age, too deliberate, too knowing. Guadalupe leaned forward. "You've met Clara." Marielle tilted her head. "Met her? I've been with her longer than you ever were." That landed like a stone in Guadalupe's stomach. She wanted to demand answers, but something in Marielle's expression told her that any direct question would be met with silence, so she tried a different angle. "Why come here then? If you have somewhere better?" Marielle's smile was faint, almost sad. "Because she asked me to." "She?" Guadalupe pressed. "You know who," Marielle said simply. "She told me to tell you that you have 3 days." The attendants glanced at each other. 3 days for what?" Guadalupe demanded. Marielle stood without permission, the move deliberate, almost mocking. 3 days before she walks through your gates herself. You can choose to open them, or she'll find another way in. Before Guadalupe could speak, Marielle turned to the attendants. "You do not need to hold me here. I know my way back to my room." And without waiting for permission, she left. Guadalupe didn't stop her. She just sat in the silence after the door closed, pulse pounding in her ears. Clara wasn't sending messages from far away. She was inside, already weaving her way through the house in pieces, and Marielle was just one of them. The next morning, Guadalupe began the purge. Every girl was questioned. Every attendant was instructed to watch for unusual behaviors, whispering, avoiding eye contact, speaking in certain tones. The infirmary was searched, the laundry room inspected, even the food stores examined. But the more she looked, the more she realized it wasn't about finding Clara. It was about unseeing her. Her mannerisms were everywhere. One girl, barely 12, was humming a melody Guadalupe hadn't heard in years, the same one Clara used to hum when she was chained in the corner. Another used a phrase no one in the house would ever teach: "You can't break what bends." By evening, Guadalupe counted 9 girls who moved, spoke, or even smiled like Clara. It was impossible. Clara had been gone 3 years. How could they all know her? Aurelio came to her office with a list of names. "These are the ones who match what you described. We can remove them quietly." Guadalupe scanned the list. Marielle was at the top, but halfway down she stopped. The handwriting on the page was hers, her own hand, yet she had no memory of writing it. She looked up sharply. "Who made this list?" "You did," Aurelio replied, confused. "This morning, you told me to wait until you were done before I took it." Her pulse quickened. She'd been in her office all morning, but she hadn't written anything. She stood abruptly. "Where are the 9 girls now?" Aurelio frowned. "In their quarters, under watch." "Double the watch," she said, already moving toward the door. When she reached the dormitory, she found the guards outside, but inside, the beds were empty. Every one of the 9 girls was gone. The windows were barred, the door was locked from the outside. There was no sign of forced entry. On each bed lay a single folded piece of paper. Every note was the same. 2 days. Guadalupe's hands trembled, lead as she held the notes. Clara wasn't just coming back. She was assembling herself piece by piece inside the house. Night fell, thick and suffocating over the mansion. Guadalupe patrolled the halls, her candle flickering, casting long, trembling shadows along the walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the iron bars, sent her heart racing. She reached the basement door and paused. A faint sound drifted up from below, not crying, not screaming, but a rhythm, a chant, low and deliberate, almost hypnotic. Guadalupe pressed her ear to the cold wood. She recognized the cadence immediately. It was Clara's voice, or the echo of it, guiding the 9 girls in unison. They had been trained to move like shadows, to obey commands without question, and now they were executing Clara's final instruction. Each word reinforced the others, each note a binding of mind and body. She flung open the door. Darkness spilled out like water. Chains clinked faintly, though no one was restrained. And then from the shadows, the girls stepped forward. Each moved with precision, their eyes wide, faces pale, lips parted in silent obedience. They were not themselves. They were Clara. Marielle led them, her gaze fixed on Guadalupe, unblinking. 2 days, she whispered, echoing the notes left on the beds. She told us the time. We start tonight. Guadalupe gripped the nearest railing, fighting nausea and the sudden surge of fear she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a rebellion. This was a takeover. The girl she had once thought dead had returned as an idea, a strategy, a living virus. The basement, once a place of control, had become a theater of inevitability. Every implement of restraint, every shadowed corner, every scarred wall bore witness to the coming reckoning. Aurelio appeared at her side, whispering, "What do we do?" Guadalupe didn't answer. She couldn't. In that moment, she realized she was no longer in command. Clara had orchestrated this from the outside, hidden within the minds of her followers. The chanting grew louder. It filled the mansion, creeping up the stairs, vibrating through the walls. Guadalupe felt the weight of years of planning, manipulation, and cruelty crashing down. She was the hunted now. The mansion shook with whispers and soft, synchronized footsteps. Guadalupe moved through the halls, heart hammering, trying to track the source. Each room she entered was empty, but every wall, every shadow seemed to pulse with presence. Clara had infiltrated every corner of the house without a single forced entry. Then she heard it, a soft, mocking laugh, echoing from the grand staircase. Guadalupe froze. The sound was unmistakable, the same laugh Clara had given the first night she vanished. It carried no warmth, no innocence, only a cold precision that sliced through her confidence. From the shadows at the top of the stairs, Marielle stepped forward, followed by the other 8 girls. They moved as one, a wave of pale, ghost-like faces, their eyes locked on Guadalupe. Every feature mirrored Clara's. Her chin tilted just so, her lips pressed together in that faint, cruel smile. "You taught them well," Marielle said, voice eerily calm. "Every fear, every humiliation, every lesson. They remembered. They remembered you." Guadalupe tried to speak, but her words caught in her throat. The power she had wielded for years now felt hollow. The mansion, the walls, the very tools of her control, all had been turned against her. Marielle advanced a few steps. She said to remind you, the mind is the last place you control, and you've already lost that. Guadalupe's mind raced, her strategies, her contingencies, every precaution, rendered useless. Clara had anticipated them all. She had infiltrated the house not with force, but with precision, patience, and the loyalty of the 9 girls she had molded into extensions of herself. The basement doors burst open behind Guadalupe, and a low chant began. It wasn't Marielle this time. It was the entire group rising from the shadows in unison. The sound was hypnotic, oppressive, unrelenting. It pressed against her chest, filling her lungs, drowning out thought. Guadalupe staggered, gripping the railing, her hands slick with sweat. She understood now. She wasn't facing a single girl, or even 9. She was facing an idea made flesh, a manifestation of every cruelty she had inflicted, every spirit she had tried to break, all turned back on her. For the first time, she felt fear the way her victims had, raw, unavoidable, and consuming. Guadalupe's knees buckled as the chant grew louder, surrounding her like a living storm. The girls, Clara's extensions, moved closer, circling her, their faces pale masks of calculated intent. Each step, each synchronized movement, reminded her of the countless hours she had spent breaking others. Now, that discipline, that precision, had been turned inward. Marielle stepped forward again, tilting her head, eyes locking with Guadalupe's. "Do you see now?" she asked, voice steady, almost gentle. "All the fear you planted, it blooms in us." Guadalupe's mind raced. She tried to summon authority, to call out commands, but the words felt meaningless. Every instinct she had relied on for decades had been anticipated, undermined, and inverted. Clara had become not just a person, but a force, a living testament to her own cruelty. One of the girls reached for the old brass candlestick on the nearby table. Guadalupe flinched, expecting a strike, but instead, the girl placed it carefully at her feet. Marielle's gaze never left hers. "She said you needed to see this," Marielle said softly. "Not death, not blood, but understanding. What it feels like to be powerless. What it feels like to have your world turned inside out by someone you thought you could control." Guadalupe's breath came fast, her hands trembling. Every scream she had inflicted, every hour of torment she had orchestrated, it returned to her now, magnified by the presence of 9 girls who embodied every lesson she had ever taught. Aurelio appeared behind her, pale and silent, his eyes reflecting the same fear she felt, but unable to intervene. He had tried to warn her, had tried to resist, but even he was now trapped in the gravity of Clara's design. Marielle stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that cut through the chant. "We are all of us the consequence of your choices, and you are finally learning the cost." Guadalupe's knees gave way and she sank to the floor. Her empire of control, her reputation, her carefully constructed world, all had crumbled. And in that moment she understood the most terrifying truth of all. Clara's revenge was not about destruction, it was about transformation. Every girl who returned, every calculated movement, every whispered word was evidence that power could shift, that the hunter could become the hunted, and that cruelty always seeds its own reckoning. The mansion was silent now, but it was a silence heavy with inevitability. Guadalupe sat on the cold stone floor, surrounded by the 9 girls who moved as extensions of Clara's will. Their eyes held no malice, no hatred, only the quiet, unyielding knowledge that she had taught them everything they needed to know to survive, and to reclaim what she had stolen from them. Marielle knelt before her. "This is not the end of us," she said, voice steady, measured. "It is the continuation of what you began." Guadalupe wanted to speak, to assert control, to deny the truth, but there was nothing left. Every strategy, every plan, every lesson in fear and obedience had been anticipated, inverted, and mastered by Clara. The realization struck her like ice water. She had created her own undoing. Every scream, every tear, every broken spirit had come back to her multiplied 100-fold. Aurelio stood nearby, watching, unable to intervene. He had chronicled years of horrors in a journal that now felt futile. He realized too late that knowledge, without power, was meaningless. He had been a witness to everything, yet powerless to stop the inevitable. Marielle rose, signaling the other girls to follow. "We leave the house," she said. "You remain, alone with your memories, your lessons, your regrets." Guadalupe looked around at the walls, the halls, the rooms, the instruments of her control, now twisted into reminders of her own fragility. The mansion, once a symbol of dominance, had become a cage of her own making. Every shadow whispered Clara's presence. Every corner echoed the lives she had destroyed. Every door was a passage she could never again command. The girls filed out, leaving Guadalupe in the center of the grand hall. The candlelight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across her trembling form. She had survived every victim, every experiment, every act of cruelty. Yet here she sat, defeated, confronted with a truth more chilling than death. That control is never absolute, and that the mind of a predator can be outwitted by the cunning of the hunted. Alone, she realized the final lesson Clara had intended. Power is a mirror, and cruelty always returns to reflect the face of the one who wields it. The mansion fell silent once more. The shadows remained deeper than before, and somewhere beyond the barred gates, Clara and her disciples vanished into the night, leaving behind a legacy that would haunt Guadalupe and the city forever. Her empire of fear had ended not with a scream, but with a quiet, inescapable understanding. She was no longer the master. She had become the story, a cautionary tale etched into the walls, whispered in shadows, a dark history that no one could ever fully forget. The echoes of Guadalupe Bejarano's life and the terrifying rise of Clara would endure, a haunting lesson that evil, no matter how meticulous, carries within it the seeds of its own reckoning. If the story of Guadalupe Bejarano and the shadow of Clara has chilled you to your core, if you feel the weight of secrets no one was meant to hear, then remember this. The line between hunter and hunted is thinner than you think. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because we uncover the histories the world tried to bury, the truths that whisper in the shadows, and the minds that society never wants you to understand. Dare to follow the darkness and see what lies behind the doors you were never supposed to open.